Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, and we are talking today about a way too early all Big Ten list for offense. We're going to do offense first, then we'll do defense after this. And I'm going to go through and name my all Big Ten player going into the season for each position. Now, I've seen some people do this a couple different ways. I think for the Big Ten, the best way to do this is one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, a tight end, and then I'll go through and do each offensive lineman. However, I will say, don't judge me too much on the offensive line because at the end of the day, a lot of offensive line is so hard to look at and predict. And I guess this isn't so much prediction, but evaluate and everything else. Like you're watching a unit of five guys and trying to pick out one. So with tackles, it's a little bit easier, but even that interior, the guards in the center, it can be really difficult. So I did my best with the interior. If you guys have different thoughts with the offensive line or with any of these, please do let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you all think. I'm not 100% on hardly any of these. I mean, there's a couple on here that I'm like, yeah, no doubt. Like you literally can't put anybody else there. If you do, you're wrong. But for the most part, like this is really hard to do, and this is something I would challenge most Big Ten fans to try and go through and do because it really is difficult, and there really are a number of guys you can make an argument for. So please do like, subscribe, check out the membership if you would like to do that. Also, go subscribe to the podcast over on Apple, Spotify, all those different things too. So that way, if you ever miss a live episode, you can always listen to it back after the fact. We got an episode Sunday night with college football with Sam. That should be fun. If you're watching this before then, go get ready to watch it. If you're watching this after Sunday night, go back and watch the episode. It's going to be a good one with college football with Sam. All right, we are now going to get into it, and I'm going to do the same thing I did before with the other. Excuse me, guys. Sorry. With the other one, I am going to bring up their PFF, and we can look at it that way and then go from there. So my first one is for quarterback. I'm going to go with Drew Aller of Penn State, and I gotta be honest, this is one of those ones where like I'm not completely sold on Drew Aller as my quarterback. I think you could make a good argument for Luke Altmaier. I think you could make a good argument for Fernando Mendoza. I tried not to go with transfers though, just because it is really difficult to try and speculate on like what would they have done in the Big Ten, or they were in a different conference. Like Fernando Mendoza was at Cal. I don't think Cal played the same level of competition that Drew Aller and Luke Altmaier and some of these other guys did, right? That's no slight on Fernando Mendoza. He had a good year last year, but I also think like he didn't play the same caliber of competition in the Big Ten that Drew Aller and Luke Altmaier did. So even though I do think there are aspects of Fernando Mendoza that could make him the number one, that was kind of my reason to go against him there. And then Luke Altmaier, as much as people want to rag on Aller for some of his mistakes and some of his shortcomings in games, like Luke Altmaier is not perfect either. I do think that Luke Altmaier and Drew Aller are similar in a lot of ways. Both of them are willing to tuck the ball and run if they need to. Both of them are in an offense that is, I wouldn't say fully predicated on their arm, but their arm is definitely important for it. Drew Aller did have less weapons at the wide receiver position than Luke Altmaier did last year, but ultimately Luke Altmaier also had far less ability at tight end than what Drew Aller had. So ultimately, what I went with was just like pure arm talent. What do I see arm talent wise? And I think from the throws I saw from Drew Aller, I think there's more arm talent there as of right now. Now they could come out next year and things could look completely different, and Luke Altmaier could throw the ball all over the yard, and it just looks pretty every single time. If that happens, all right, I'm wrong. That's fine. But the way I look at it right now, leading up into things, Drew Aller, Luke Altmaier, very close. Fernando Mendoza just didn't play in the Big Ten, so I'm not going to put him up there. If you guys have anybody else you think other than those three, I'd love to hear your reasoning why. And then if you have a reason why you think Luke Altmaier should be one, or why Drew Aller is further separated from Luke Altmaier, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. All right, the next one, and I'm gonna have to type these in live, guys. I apologize. So my next one, the running back is. I don't think this will come to any surprise for anybody, but it is Nicholas Singleton. If I can find, where's it? Oh, I got to scroll super far for Nicholas. Nicholas Singleton, the Penn State running back from last year. was a little difficult picking between him and Katron Allen, but overall the production of Nicholas Singleton spoke for itself. So just a fantastic running back. Came up huge in a number of games down the stretch. He was really, really good against Oregon. I felt like had over 100 yards in that game. Didn't have a touchdown, but was integral in moving the ball down the field little by little and helping them to be able to stay in that game with Oregon's high-powered offense. Was honestly surprised Penn State's defense wasn't able to stop Oregon. I thought there would be more of a battle there. But credit to Penn State's offense and Nicholas Singleton for being able to come in and really do a good job there. So not really a huge touchdown game from Nicholas Singleton throughout the year. Maryland, he had 2 touchdowns really until the end in that Notre Dame game where he didn't have the most yards in the world, but he was reliable. He took the ball away, and he had big runs. So he had 2 runs of 10 yards or more. And altogether, when you have 32 runs of 10 yards or more in the season, like that's pretty darn good. So I'm a big fan of Nicholas Singleton. I am, and I think he's gonna have another big year next year. Him and Katron Allen together. Now it would have been easy for me just to pick Katron Allen to be my RB2, but there was another guy that I didn't feel like got enough love last year for what he did. It's Jonah Coleman from Washington. I really, really like Jonah Coleman. Coming into the Big Ten, he had, the aura of like the yards per attempt and stuff like that. And I do think that's still a factor here. But at the end of the day, like I felt like Jonah Coleman had a really good year. That needs to be recognized. Very talented back, running the ball, catching the ball as well. Katron Allen just didn't have the production that he had, and that's probably a big part of that is because he has Nicholas Singleton in his room as well. But overall, I really liked what Jonah Coleman brought to the table. Had multiple games of over 100 yards. He had multiple games of multiple touchdowns. Just really, really like what Jonah Coleman brought to the table. I felt like he was really underrated last year because Washington was kind of middle of the pack, but he's coming back next year. He's going to be a great piece for this Washington team, and I'm really excited to see what Jedd Fisch does with him this next year. All right, my next one. This is one of those ones I hinted at that's like if you don't put him here, you just have no idea what you're talking about. And quite frankly, I don't know how you couldn't, but it's Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State. I don't know what else to say. 1,300 yards plus last year, 15 touchdowns. It was one of the, I think Michael Crabtree was the only freshman that's ever had more touchdowns as a wide receiving touchdowns in one season than him. So just a fantastic year. You look at the way he was down the stretch, had that huge catch against Notre Dame to end the game. He had a big game against Oregon, big game against Tennessee. Really his only game that he didn't do all that much when he probably could have done more was Michigan. And I would attribute that more to Will Howard not being himself and some poor play calling in that game. But even in that one, he still had a touchdown. So it's like, didn't have a great game, but he still had a touchdown. He only had 3 games last year where he didn't have a touchdown. Or 4 games, I apologize, Texas as well. 4 games last year where he didn't have a touchdown. That is absolutely wild. The guy played in 16 games, had 4 games where he didn't have a touchdown. Just fantastic player Jeremiah Smith is, and if you're leaving him off, you just don't know what you're talking about. All right, next one is, and he's kind of under the radar as well because I don't know if everybody knows that he's returning, but Elijah Surratt of Indiana, he's returning next year. He kind of their deep ball threat kind of guy. He had a lot of big receptions last year, kind of over the shoulder guy. Even in a game where he had 8 receptions, he still averaged 20 plus yards per catch. That was against Purdue. Purdue obviously not a good team, but still what he was able to do. Michigan State, he had 2 touchdown catches against them. In the Michigan game, he had a huge catch in that one to help the team. I think it was his only catch of the game. Yeah, against Michigan. That was his only catch of the game, but he came up clutch there to have a big catch that was really meaningful for them in that one. And against Maryland, Northwestern, he really toasted guys. Against Notre Dame, he had 4 catches, 67 yards in that one, so you'd like to see that a little bit better. And I know anytime I put anybody from Indiana on this list, it's gonna be like, well, look what they did against Michigan, Ohio State, and Notre Dame. I get it, but we have to let those other games count as well. So that's the way I look at there. Elijah Surratt, I could entertain maybe a couple of different other guys for the wide receiver one, but that's gonna be my pick there for wide receiver. Next is tight end, and it's actually a transfer, but it's a transfer in the conference, so I feel a little bit better about it. Max Clare from Purdue. Much more of a receiving tight end. He had 8 targets or more 3 times last year. That was huge. Against Penn State, he had 7 targets, 7 catches, 91 yards, and a touchdown. That's a Penn State team that has really good safeties, and they have good coverage in the back end. So for Max Clare to be able to do that against Penn State, that's impressive. Against Michigan State, he had 83 yards and a touchdown. He was really one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten last year, and it kind of went unnoticed because Purdue was just so bad. And it really is unfortunate. I don't think it's going to go unnoticed this year, though, at Ohio State. I think Ohio State's going to utilize him in the slot a lot of different ways, make things interesting. And I think the name of Max Clare is going to be one that's known very well, not just in the Big Ten, but nationally next year as well. So I'm going to go with Max Clare right there. All right, my favorite part now, the offensive line, which I know everybody just loves to hear about. Like I said there, yeah, Max Clare, not the best blocker in the world, but a good receiving tight end. All right, so another transfer here. I'm gonna go with Isaiah World, the offensive tackle transfer into Oregon. Now I know he didn't play Ohio State Big Ten football last year, but he was really freaking good. He's the number one player in the 24/7 transfer portal rankings. Oregon got themselves a really good one here. He's 6'8", 309 pounds. He was just excellent in pass protection last year. Had an efficiency of over 98, which is fantastic. Pretty much all these guys had really good efficiency on the offensive line. That's something I look for a lot when I'm doing this kind of stuff. And he was really, really good. So gave up a good amount of pressures, but only gave up 1 sack. So when you're giving up pressures, but you're only giving up 1 sack, some of that's on the quarterback, but some of that is also just maneuverability, blocking toward the end, stuff like that to be able to help your guy out. So only 1 sack on over, what was it, on 450 pass blocking snaps. It's pretty darn good. So I'm going to go with Isaiah World there. My next one, and this will be another one, a kind of controversial one because he's from Indiana, and Indiana is always controversial, but I'm going to go with Carter Smith. Now, I know a lot of people look at Carter Smith and say, well, JR, that offensive line was terrible against Ohio State, terrible against Michigan, and they weren't so good against Notre Dame. Yeah, they weren't, but I mean, it wasn't really on Carter Smith. Like, yeah, Carter Smith did give up 1 sack with 1 pressure against Ohio State. He did give up 1 sack against Michigan, but was literally it the entire season. The entire season, he was solid. He gave up 1 pressure against Charlotte, a couple pressures against Nebraska, a couple against Michigan State, but like for the most part, like his efficiency was also above 98. That's really good. Nearly 450 at 421 pass blocking stats, like or snaps, not stats. So I really liked what Carter Smith did last year for them at left tackle, and there were a lot of players that were trying to get, or a lot of teams that were trying to get pressure on Curtis Work last year to try and get to him. And when you're playing left tackle, you're going up against the best of the best at the edge position for the other team. So I really like what he was able to do. I think that he goes a little under noticed just because of all the injuries or not the injuries, because of the big games and how the rest of the offensive line didn't perform. But overall, I like the way Carter Smith did it last year, and I think he was really good. So I think he deserves the spot there. If you disagree with me, please let me know. Who else you would put there instead? All right, now the interior. I think this is probably where there will be the most discussion, the most disagreement, and it's not so much like a stat thing, and that's the hardest part. Like you can't just like throw out a stat and say, well, this guy was better for this reason, because there's so much that goes into interior offensive line play that makes that nearly impossible. I'm gonna go with Vega Ione. I know I'm saying that wrong. I apologize. From Penn State. I'm sure he had a nickname last year, but I'm blanking on it. He was really good last year. ESPN did the same thing with their All-American, way too early All-Americans. He was on it for them. He allowed 0 sacks in 16 games, nearly 500 pass blocking snaps. Like you look at some of the stats compared to other guys in the Big Ten, you're like, oh, okay, he was okay. But then you remember he played 16 games, and he played against Oregon, Boise State. I know it was Boise State, but still that's a playoff team. Played against Notre Dame, had a good game against SMU, only 1 pressure there. And then guys like the defensive lines in the Big Ten are pretty doggone good. So for him to go up against Washington and Minnesota and Ohio State, Illinois, like for him to go up against some of those defensive lines, which, granted, maybe they weren't as good, not Ohio State, but maybe some of them weren't as good as they have been in the past. These are still good Big Ten defensive lines that it was tough for him to go up against and not just be able to pass block, but also run blocking as well. Felt like he was a mauler. He had some clips on social media of him just absolutely destroying dudes on the interior of the offensive line. It's a shame we never saw him go up against Michigan. I think that would have been a really interesting matchup between him and Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and Rashawn Benny and all that stuff. But yeah, so great season for him last year. Want to give him credit there. All right. Next, we are going to look at another Indiana one, and this is the one where I'll probably get the most flack, and that's okay. I get it. If you find me a better guard, please let me know, though. He had over a 99 efficiency last year, and that's Drew Evans, the left guard for Indiana last year. Only allowed 4 pressures all season. Now, granted, he only played in 9 games. He got hurt right before the Michigan game, and that was really when Indiana's offensive line had their hardest time. But that was when Indiana lost their best or second best offensive lineman last year. So it was really tough for them to lose him. So I'm still going to give Drew Evans his credit, though. Coming back next year, he should be a really good player for them and be a nice piece and really solidify the left side of that offensive line. All right, and last but certainly not least, on the offensive line, we have the Iowa center Logan Jones. Was really high on him last year. People thought that there was a good chance that he was going to leave after last year, but he's deciding to come back for another year. This is going to be huge for Iowa. Their offensive line performed well last year. The communication that Logan Jones was able to give this team prior to snaps and everything else, amidst multiple different quarterbacks playing as well, was integral. A lot of times you see that pre-snap communication from the quarterback or the center, sometimes a combination of the two. Even when you had Jackson Stratton in there and Brendan Sullivan, who wasn't as experienced as Cade McNamara, and Cade McNamara, who really didn't know how to communicate with his offensive line before the snap, you had Logan Jones doing a really good job, not just in pass blocking, but also run blocking assignments, everything like that too. So he was actually a better run blocker last year, graded out again on PFF than anything. So Logan Jones coming back next year. I love it. I think he's going to do a great job. I'm really excited to see him be a part of this offensive line again, and it's going to be a good time. So that is my list for you. I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know your thoughts if you have any thoughts on somebody different. I know there's probably going to be some different options for the offensive line. I get it. I'm not 100% on any of those guys. Isaiah World, I probably am, but other than them, not really 100% on any of them. So if you guys have any other thoughts or who you think should be there, I'd love to know your thoughts. So, but great stuff. Looking forward to another year of good Big Ten football next year, and I think that a lot of these guys are going to help make that happen. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Have a good one.